everyone, my name is Allie and welcome to my channel, and today I'm going to be talking about some of the books that I would recommend for the fall/spooky season. So I intend for this video to actually kind of be a two-parter. So this is the first part. These are the books that I've read in the past couple of years that I would highly recommend, that I absolutely love, and that I think are perfect for this time of year, or I guess like the upcoming time of year. But I also want to do a second part of this video, hopefully talking about some other books that I also recommend. Maybe if I read some books that are fall/spooky inspired or themed in the next few weeks, then I can do a second part of this video and recommend some more books to you all before the season is over, and I think that would be a lot of fun. I already have quite a few books that I want to talk about, but I actually am not even talking about all of the books that I would technically recommend for this time of the year. So yeah, I definitely have more that I would love to talk about in a part 2, but we'll see if that ends up happening. I make no promises. But even though it's pretty warm outside, I live in California and I don't have AC in my house, I am still in the fall mood with my little Taylor Swift cardigan. I have the tan and maroon colored cardigan, which I love. And I am also drinking a pumpkin spice latte from Starbucks, and it's actually in my little skull glass that I've had for quite a while. I got mine from Amazon, but I do remember last year that at least Walmart had a very similar skull glass, and it was actually a little bit bigger than this one, so it was both bigger and cheaper than this one. So hopefully if they have it again this year, you can go pick it up at Walmart. But if not, I will leave the link down below if I can find it for the Amazon pair that I ended up getting, and I love them. I think they're so cute and they are perfect for the spooky fall season. Okay, so I'm really excited to talk about these books, and I actually kind of sectioned them off into spookier books, or kind of like thrillers, horror, stuff like that, and then going into fantasy, because I feel like fantasy is perfect for the fall season, especially like fall and winter. Those are fantasy's seasons. And then I also added in a few just like general fall books. And I will also talk about some of the books that I don't physically own, but I won't go into them as in depth as the ones that I do own. So I want to start off with some thrillers, horror, kind of dark academia, and the first one I want to recommend is In My Dreams I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead. I read this book last year and I absolutely loved it, and I actually just recently sort of recommended it to one of my friends, and I described it as less of a typical thriller that you would think of, and it's more of like a dark academia with a mystery, like a murder mystery in there. And I think that that's a perfect way to describe this book, because I think some people can get a little turned off by this book because they think it's going to be like a high intensity thriller, and that's just not what it is. It is very much a murder mystery. So if you like things like Knives Out, you might really enjoy this book, but it is also very like dark academia. It's actually set at a college, and it's for their 10-year graduation anniversary. But it also goes back in time to when they were in college and the murder actually happened. You kind of get that dual timelines action going on there. And I feel like the less you know about this book, the better. It does say like an addictive and riveting psychological thriller. I wouldn't describe that book as this. I don't think it's exactly like riveting or anything like that, but it is really interesting, and it does go really in depth into each of these characters. So if you are more of a character driven reader, you might really enjoy this book. The next book I would like to recommend is actually more of a Gothic horror, which I figured out last year that I really love Gothic horror. It's one of my favorite genres, and I would love to read more books that are within that genre. Hopefully maybe this year I will get to more of them, but I read this one last year and absolutely loved it, and that is The Death of Jane Lawrence by Caitlin Starling. I loved this book so much, and I just found it so highly addictive and engaging, and I could not put it down. If you are interested in reading the audiobook, I highly recommend it for this one. It was so good, so well done. This book is basically about the titular character Jane, and she is really interested in a marriage of convenience. She really wants to marry somebody who's not going to like expect too much of her as a wife and is going to let her be really independent. And so she ends up meeting this doctor, this kind of reclusive doctor, and he agrees to her marriage of convenience, but he has one stipulation, that she should never visit his family manor that is outside of town, and he has a lot of secrets that she cannot know about. And so she agrees. They end up getting married. And through the first few days and weeks and months of their marriage, weird things start to happen, and she starts to be a bit more intrigued by who this man is and what secrets he is hiding. And there is a lot of magic. It is very Gothic inspired. The atmosphere is absolutely impeccable, and I love this book. If you're looking to get into Gothic horror, I feel like this is a perfect avenue, like a perfect like first little toe dip into the genre. The next book I want to recommend is another one that I feel like is great if it's like your first Gothic horror book ever. I think that this is a really great pick, and that is of course Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia, which I recommend literally all of her books. I think I've only read about 4 of them, but all 4 of them have been amazing, like just like the most iconic books ever. So I feel pretty confident in just recommending her as an author. But my first book that I ever read from this author was Mexican Gothic, and I loved it so much. It was so amazing. Again, I feel like in this book the atmosphere really shines, and this book is set in 1950s Mexico, and it follows the main character whose name is Noemi, and she and her father end up getting this letter from her cousin, which seems very weird and out of character, and she just has a really bad feeling about this letter and has a bad feeling about her cousin's situation. And so she ends up going and visiting her cousin, who is just newly married to this white British man, and she's been living with his family, and weird things are happening. Her cousin is acting really weird, and so many secrets start to unravel, so many like family secrets start to unravel, and it's both really disturbing and also really illuminating to like 1950s Mexico culture. And it also touches on like the topics of racism and family dynamics, and I mean it's just like everything that I love in books is in this book, and Silvia Moreno Garcia just executed it absolutely perfectly, and I love it. I highly recommend this book. If you want to read Gothic horror, these 2 are great options. Just absolutely beautiful books. So the next book I want to talk about is one that I have had a pretty hard time trying to categorize, because even on Goodreads it's kind of categorized as a little bit of everything. I don't really know if I should categorize it as horror or thriller, or I don't really know what box to put this book in, but I absolutely love it. And that is Baby Teeth by Zoya Stage, and oh my gosh, this book is absolutely phenomenal. I actually got this at the Dollar Tree, and I had 0 expectations for it, like I do with most books that I pick up at the Dollar Tree, but this one completely proved me wrong. It blew me away. I was just so obsessed, and it kind of unlocked something in my brain of like, oh, I really enjoy these kind of stories. And basically this book is about a new mother, well, not really new mother at this stage, but it kind of goes throughout this child's life, and she has given birth to a daughter, and ever since she was born, or pretty close to when she was born, they have never really connected. And the mother really doesn't know why. She really tries to put on this facade of like everything's fine, everything's perfect. But as her daughter starts to get a little bit older year by year, their relationship becomes much more strained and much more toxic and much more weird. And even some paranormal aspects start to come into play with this book. It's really interesting, and it's so well executed. And it's really impressive to me that a book so short packs such a huge punch and is so impactful to me. Like, I loved it. And there were so many moments like where I actually got a little emotional over this mother-daughter relationship, because I felt like this book, despite it being just almost like supernatural and just kind of like out of this world, very hyperbolic in the way that it depicts mother-daughter relationships, I also found it to be really true and really honest, and like painfully so. It really made me think about my relationship with my mom and all mother-daughter relationships and how they're all a little bit like this. And I was like so shocked and impressed by the way that this author handled this topic. I thought it was absolutely beautifully well done. And of course, the dad in this book is absolutely useless and I hate him. So, I mean, that is just, that is just par for the course with these kind of books. Another book that I would highly recommend that is in this similar genre, this very similar premise, is The Push by Ashley Audrain. I loved that book. I also read it last year, very close to when I read this one, and I loved it. Very similar premise. Also really talks a lot about the mother-daughter relationship. It is a little bit different. It does kind of like explore it in a little bit different way, but it is definitely that like weird toxic mother-daughter relationship where the young daughter is just kind of like out to get the mom and out to get this family. I don't know, I really loved it. I thought it was fantastic. So if you're really into this, if you read Baby Teeth or you read The Push, read the other one. Definitely read them both because they're both so good. Another one I would also recommend for that kind of premise is Sisters by Daisy Johnson. That one's less so about mother-daughter relationships and more about sister-sister relationships. So recommend both of those, or I guess all three. This one, I didn't really know whether to put it in more of the spooky section or more of the fantasy section because I feel like it has a little bit of both. And that is The Inheritance of Arcadia Divina by Zoraida Cordova. I love this book. I think it's absolutely fantastic. It is a huge 5-star read for me. But I mean, basically every Zoraida Cordova book is a 5-star read for me, let's be honest. I love this one, and if you are looking for, I mean, I hate to simplify this book, but I feel like it's the best way to describe it, and that is like an adult Encanto. If that's what you're looking for, I feel like this is perfect because it really does have that sort of like Encanto feel of, there's like magical realism, there's also these like really cool family dynamics, there is also this like family matriarch who kind of looms over the rest of the family and really kind of decides the fate of the rest of the family without any sort of input, and you don't really know everything about her. She has a really interesting history that you get to uncover throughout the book, and yeah, there are definitely a lot of really cool parallels between this book and Encanto. So if you like Encanto and you're looking for something more adult, this would be perfect for you. But basically this book is about Arcadia Divina, and she is the matriarch of the Montoya family, and when she is about to die, she summons all of her family to her home, and she gets them all there under the guise of collecting their inheritance. But something else ends up happening, and I feel like this is a great book to go into just knowing that sort of like very loose, very simple premise, and getting surprised throughout the entire story and uncovering it with the rest of the characters. So don't know too much about it going into it. I mean, I feel like that's what I say about most books. I personally am the kind of reader who likes to go into books without knowing everything about the premise. Like, I might read the little synopsis inside once or twice, but after that, I just kind of want to figure it out while I'm reading the book. So yeah, highly recommend this one. And I mean, I recommend all of Zoraida Cordova's books for this time of year. I think that she writes perfect books for like the fall spooky season. But we are finally into my fantasy section, which I'm really excited to talk about. And the first one that I want to bring up is Music of the Night by Angela J. Ford. This is a Phantom of the Opera retelling, which I think about, was it 2021 that I got really into Phantom of the Opera retellings. I read so many of them, and this was the best one by far. The writing is absolutely beautiful. It is so delectable. It is flowery to a point. Like, it's not too flowery. It doesn't go overboard. I wouldn't necessarily call it purple prose, but it is beautiful. It's beautifully written. So if you like really engaging and intricate descriptive prose, I would highly recommend this book. It is beautiful. It is also a romance fantasy, so if you're into romance, if you're into fantasy, this would be a perfect little mix. And like I said, it is a Phantom of the Opera retelling, so it's not like a super strict Phantom of the Opera retelling. It's very loose, but I think that if you are a fan of the Phantom of the Opera, you would also really, really love this book. So I guess it does kind of have that spooky element. It is kind of in both of the camps of like fantasy and spooky, but it is really beautiful. I highly recommend it. The romance was just so good. The characters were so great. And it's very atmospheric, I will say, so highly recommend this one. The next fantasy book that I would like to recommend is one that I read this year and absolutely became obsessed with, and that is Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. Oh my gosh, I am so obsessed with this series. I read the first book, I read the second book, and I just loved them both so much. And actually the third book I believe is coming out this year, so keep your eye out for that. I'm pretty sure it comes out in September or October. I can't really remember, but I feel like now would be the perfect time to start this series and get ready for the third book. This one I think is even a little bit better than Caraval, I will say. I think that this one is definitely going to be more beloved by more people. I feel like Caraval can kind of be a bit of a polarizing series. I think some people really didn't like the first book. I personally love Caraval. Like, I love the first book. I think every book in the series is pretty great, but I know that it's not for everybody. I feel like Once Upon a Broken Heart is kind of more for everybody. I think that so many people are going to love this book. So many people already do love this book, so it's not like I am recommending some like underground little book or whatever, but I just had to include it because I feel like right now is the perfect time to read it. The last fantasy book that I want to recommend is Little Thieves by Margaret Owen. This is a bit of a chonker, I will say, but it is really worth it. I thought that this book was so much fun, and the main character is so witty and so funny and so relatable. I just love her. I love her so much. And the writing in this book, just phenomenal. So good. This is definitely one of my favorite YA fantasies of all time, and I actually need to read so many more books by Margaret Owen. I know that she has another series which starts with The Merciful Crow. I actually own that book, but I haven't read it yet, and I feel like I'm so behind. But yeah, definitely read Little Thieves. This one is about Vanya, and she is a thief, but she is also the adopted goddaughter of Death and Fortune, and was the princess's servant up until a year ago when she ended up stealing the princess's life for herself. So it is a bit of a retelling of The Goose Girl, which I have read a couple of different retellings of that fairy tale, and I feel like this one might be one of my favorites, but honestly most of them are pretty good. So if you're looking for really good like fairy tale retellings, definitely check out ones that are based on The Goose Girl. I feel like a lot of authors do a pretty good job with that one. But while Vanya is living her life as a princess slash thief, she ends up getting cursed and is turning into jewels stone by stone for her greed. Her like entire body is being covered with jewels. And it says Vanya has just 2 weeks to figure out how to break her curse and make her get away. And with a feral guardian, half god, Giselle's sinister fiance, Giselle's the princess, and an overeager junior detective on Vanya's tail, she'll have to pull the biggest grift yet to save her own life. So I think that this book is really fun, really different compared to a lot of other YA fantasies. And I should also mention that there is demisexual representation, lesbian representation, fat representation, I believe, and that's it. I can't remember if there's anything else in there, but yeah. Definitely check this one out if you're looking for a demisexual rep in fantasy, because it was really, really well done. Okay, now I just have two like sort of general autumnal books to recommend. And the first one I want to get to is Autumn by Ali Smith. I read this finally last year. I had honestly been meaning to read this book for a while, but I never got around to reading it, and finally I did, and I loved it. I underlined so much of this book, honestly. I absolutely loved it. I thought that the prose was so beautiful, and this isn't really like a plot driven story, so I can't really tell you exactly what it's about, but it just has that like autumnal vibe, and it's very character driven. It's about this young girl, and it's kind of going throughout her life, and really focuses on her relationship or her friendship with her elderly neighbor and their conversations and what she learns from him growing up. I thought that this was absolutely beautiful. It was just so beautiful. The prose was so gorgeous. It's very impactful. There were so many quotes that have just stuck with me. Whenever I recommend this book, I always want to read a few of the quotes that I underlined. One of the things I underlined says, "Overnight, like a girl in a myth being hunted by a god who's determined to have his way with her, she has altered herself, remade herself so she can't be had by anyone. We have to hope," Daniel was saying, "that the people who love us and who know us a little bit will in the end have seen us truly. In the end, not much else matters." And these ones I actually underlined and said mirror ball. It says, "I find that I have a fantasy image. It's that I really like making other people happy, which is probably egotistical because they think, what a lovely girl, you know. But it's also that I don't want people to touch me. So I always like to feel that I'm sort of floating by and just occasionally being there, seeing them." Which I felt was just so mirror ball coded. So yeah, I highly, highly recommend this book. I thought it was so amazing and fantastic. It is part of a seasonal quartet. So there is autumn, there's winter, spring, and summer. I would check out all of them, and I just highly recommend this one for this time of year, obviously. Okay, so the last book that I have to recommend is another one of my favorite books of all time, and that is Writers and Lovers by Lily King. I feel like I always have to mention this book. I always have to bring it up anytime I'm talking about fall books, autumn recommendations, anything like that, cozy reads. I wouldn't necessarily call this like a cozy read, I guess, but it definitely does remind me of fall. It is very much a fall book in my mind. And also, if you are a writer, if you're an author, anything like that, if you are a creative person at all, this book is just going to absolutely destroy you, so be prepared. Basically, this book is about an author, and she has been kind of going through a lot lately. She has just lost her mom, and that kind of induced a writer's block. And she's really struggling to pay her rent, to like keep everything together. And she ends up getting into these two sort of separate relationships. And I feel like this book is best described by the last paragraph in the synopsis. And it says, "Writers and Lovers follows the main character in the last days of a long youth, a time when every element of her life comes to a crisis. Written with King's trademark humor, heart, and intelligence, Writers and Lovers is a transfixing novel that explores the artistic passion, ambition, and the terrifying and exhilarating leap between the end of one phase of life and the beginning of another." Also, the main character is 31, and so it's kind of like in that sort of subgenre of literary fiction where it's about like a woman in her like 20s or 30s who is kind of going through a transformation of life, a transformation of like a different phase in her life, almost like a coming of age novel. And I just loved it. I really resonated with this novel. I thought it was so beautifully written, and it has really stuck with me over these past couple of years since I read it. I think I read it in 2021, so it's been like 2 years. I would love to reread it. I think I would like to find the audiobook because I did read it physically the first time around, and I think I would love to listen to the audiobook to see if I get something a little bit different from it. I highly, highly recommend this book. I think it's absolutely beautiful. If you're looking for a literary fiction novel, this is one of the best in my opinion. All right, so those are all of the books that I would like to recommend this time around for the fall/spooky season. I had so much fun talking about all of these books, and I can't wait to make a part 2. Hopefully I will have some good books, you know, some new fresh picks to recommend in part 2. But I think that this is a really great starting point. I think that I got a really great group of books together, and let me know if you end up picking any of these up, if you're interested in any of these books. I think a lot of us are really excited for the fall and autumn, whatever you want to call it, season. And I don't know, I think we're all just ready for it. I think I think a lot of us are just done with summer at this point. So let's move on. Let's start reading some cozy, spooky books. And yeah, if you have any recommendations for me for this time of year, let me know in the comments down below. And I hope you all enjoyed this video, and if you did, go ahead and give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel. Also go ahead and follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Goodreads, Storygraph, TikTok. All of the other social media links are all down below, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye!
Ooh, I thought it'd be me and you.